The modern world runs on something most people never question. A belief so familiar it no longer feels fragile. Not a law written into history, not a treaty signed between nations, but a shared assumption repeated every day without resistance. The assumption that the dollar is permanent, that it will always exist, always function, always be there tomorrow. Every contract, every reserve, every global price is built on that certainty, treated as a natural law rather than a human agreement. Over time, the dollar stops feeling like money and starts feeling like infrastructure, something foundational and untouchable. When a system becomes infrastructure, it becomes invisible, and invisibility is where examination fades. That is how dominance grows, not through strength alone, but through trust that no longer needs to be earned. History shows collapse never begins with panic, but with confidence that becomes automatic. The most dangerous moment is when a system is no longer imagined as temporary. Every empire that ever dominated the world shared the same quiet conviction. Not spoken openly, not written into law, but deeply felt and rarely questioned. The belief that their system was different, that their power had reached a level history could no longer reverse. Rome believed its currency was eternal because Rome itself felt eternal. Centuries later, the British Empire believed the same about the pound, anchored by trade and reach. In each case, dominance created the same logic. If a system has survived for generations, it must be stable by nature. If it has always worked, it must continue to work. This belief never feels arrogant. It feels reasonable. Past success slowly becomes proof of future safety. Preparation for decline begins to feel unnecessary. History shows empires are not unprepared because they are ignorant. They are unprepared because experience convinces them nothing fundamental can change. That belief always appears just before the break. At a certain point, trust stops being a conscious decision and slowly turns into a habit reinforced by time. The world no longer evaluates the dollar with caution or intent. It relies on it automatically and without reflection. Contracts are written in it, reserves are stored in it, and risk itself is consistently measured through it. The system becomes the reference point, no longer the subject of scrutiny, doubt, or serious debate. This is no longer confidence in the strict sense. It is dependence quietly taking root across the system. Dependence reshapes behavior silently, without resistance, and without any visible opposition. Discipline weakens over time, limits feel optional, and correction steadily loses urgency. Past success replaces constant evaluation, reputation standing in for ongoing proof and restraint. That is when even strong systems begin to drift slowly, silently, and without immediate consequence. Once dependence is firmly established, risk does not disappear. It slowly becomes acceptable and familiar. Deficits are no longer treated as warnings. They are explained, contextualized, justified, and eventually normalized. Inflation is no longer feared as a serious threat. It is described as temporary, controlled, and manageable. Expansion is no longer questioned. It is framed as necessary for stability, continuity, and long-term growth. Language becomes the first line of defense, softening reality long before any correction is required. Complex explanations replace restraint, and reassurance quietly takes the place of discipline. This is how unstable systems survive longer than they should, without triggering alarm or resistance. Collapse does not begin with excess itself, but when excess stops feeling dangerous or abnormal. When urgency disappears, correction is delayed, and delay always compounds silently over time, without warning. Here is the mistake every dominant system eventually makes, not because it is weak, but because it is deeply trusted over time. Empires do not collapse when confidence fades. They collapse when confidence becomes unquestioned and automatic. The belief that a system cannot fail is the precise moment it stops correcting itself internally. Limits begin to feel artificial. Discipline feels unnecessary, and restraint gradually loses justification. This is the psychological trap hidden inside long-term dominance and the illusion of lasting stability. Every monetary order in history has entered this phase before any visible breakdown appears. Not during crisis, but during certainty, when doubt feels irrational, dangerous, or irresponsible. The dollar is not vulnerable because people doubt it, but because most people still do not. History does not repeat through accidents. It repeats through belief, and belief is always the last thing to break. Once a system reaches this stage, warning signs do not disappear. They are simply reclassified. Concerns are labeled extreme, doubts are framed as misunderstanding, criticism becomes inconvenient. This is not censorship or conspiracy. It is instinctive self-preservation of the system itself. Institutions are designed to protect confidence, because confidence is what keeps everything standing. Questioning the foundation feels dangerous, not because it is wrong, but because belief holds structure together. Over time, warnings are surrounded by reassurance until they lose urgency, impact, and emotional weight. Signals are acknowledged intellectually, but never allowed to influence real behavior or policy decisions. By the time the signs become undeniable, they are no longer new, surprising, or actionable. And when recognition finally arrives, reaction is always late, constrained, and incomplete by design and habit. Collapse never begins with panic or dramatic exits. It begins with quiet adjustment over time and without spectacle. No announcements are made, no alarms sound, and no official declarations ever appear publicly or urgently. Instead, small decisions start to change slowly, carefully, and deliberately without drawing attention or debate. Reserves are diversified discreetly. Agreements are quietly rewritten. Exposure is reduced step by step. Nothing looks dramatic, because nothing is meant to look dramatic at this early and uncertain stage. This is how dominant systems weaken without shock, noise, or visible resistance from outside forces. Confidence does not vanish overnight. It thins gradually through cautious, calculated behavior repeated daily. When enough actors begin to act just in case, the system feels it almost immediately beneath the surface. By the time the shift becomes visible to everyone else, it has already happened in silence and restraint. A dominant currency does not fail when panic erupts. It fails when certainty slowly becomes conditional over time. Trust is still present, but it is no longer instinctive, automatic, or unquestioned in every decision made. Each action now carries a silent calculation, a quiet pause that did not exist before this stage. Is this still safe, for now, under current conditions, with current assumptions still holding firmly? That hesitation changes everything, even if nothing visible appears to break or collapse yet. Markets can absorb bad news, shocks, and volatility for long periods without losing structure or cohesion. They cannot absorb doubt about the foundation that holds every promise together across time and belief. Once confidence requires explanation, reassurance replaces belief, and stability begins to weaken internally. History shows this moment is brief, not dramatic, but decisive, irreversible, and deeply consequential. This pattern does not belong to one nation, one currency, or one historical moment in time. It repeats because it is rooted in human behavior, not in policy choices or political ideology alone. Every monetary system is built on trust, and trust always feels manageable, stable, and controllable at first. Power creates confidence. Confidence creates complacency, and complacency weakens correction over time. This sequence has appeared across empires, centuries, and economic models without exception or deviation. Not because leaders are ignorant or malicious, but because belief is rewarded more consistently than doubt. The stronger a system becomes, the harder it is to imagine its limits, boundaries, or eventual failure. History does not repeat because humans forget the past, but because they dismiss its relevance entirely. Each generation believes it has escaped the cycle, right before the cycle quietly returns again. The dollar is not collapsing today, and it may not collapse tomorrow or even in the near future. That fact is often used as proof that nothing fundamental is wrong, that the system remains intact and reliable. But timing has never been the lesson history was trying to teach attentive civilizations over time. The lesson is pattern, repetition, and the psychology that hides quietly behind apparent stability and order. Every dominant currency reaches a moment where belief slowly outlives discipline and restraint. Not because leaders fail outright, but because long success convinces systems they are immune to limits. This is not a prediction, and it is not a warning designed to create fear or artificial urgency. It is a historical pattern that has repeated across centuries, empires, and monetary orders without exception. The real danger is never collapse itself, but the belief that collapse is impossible at all.